Welcome, creative adventurers. I'm Debbie Cohn with Cohn Designs. Thank you for stopping by today. In today's video, I'm going to show you the first two blocks in our quilt along called A Walk in the Stars. I hope you're joining us. The first two blocks in the quilt along are the Friendship Star and the Star Flower blocks. Now, I'm not showing you these blocks in the order that they're being sewn into the quilt, but rather I'm showing them to you in the order of ease of construction. So the Friendship Star is the easiest, and then the Star Flower is the next easiest. It just so happens that it's the smallest block and the largest block in the quilt. Behind me, you can see on my makeshift design wall, I've tacked up the background fabric for the quilt. In this version of the quilt, I've chosen a dark background. In the original version of the quilt, I chose a light background. So for this one, you can see that the Friendship Star right here has only 9 pieces to it. It's simple half square triangle construction with a fussy cut center if you want it that way. The Star Flower block is really only 16 pieces, and it's the same half square triangle construction with some solid blocks as well. So it's simple to put together. First, I'll show you the Friendship Star in detail, and then a quick version of the Star Flower block. Along the way, I'm going to give you lots of tips and helpful hints. If you're enjoying this video, please give it a big thumbs up and tell a friend to join you on the quilt along. Subscribe to my YouTube channel as well. That's the best way you can support my channel, and tell a friend. I've posted both block patterns on my blog. To get those block patterns, you'll need to go to my blog on my website at dcohndesigns.com. When you get to the blog post, just scroll down a little bit and you'll see the link right there for both block patterns. Be sure to download those block patterns by November 30th, 2023. After that, I'm going to take down the individual block patterns and consolidate them into a single quilt pattern, and then add some additional sizes and then offer it for sale. Don't wait, download them now while you're thinking about it. Also, if you'd like a couple of freebies to help you with your quilt along journey, I've got them for you. You'll just need to go over to my blog, again, dcohndesigns.com, and subscribe to my email and newsletter list, and there you'll find some labels for your personal use, as well as a quilt along checklist. I hope you find them helpful. So let's get started on our blocks. Here's a tip for you that might help when thinking about the fabrics you're going to use for the quilt. If you're a little bit OCD like me and you want to make sure you've got it planned out pretty well, you could make a little chart like I did here. I've got the different fabrics I'm using here. I marked whether they were from a store or my stash. Then I put each block across the top right here, and then I marked which fabrics I decide to use for each block. And you can tell by the X's. That does several things. One, I've got a map in my head and I don't feel stressed out. 2, I can look and see if I have a good distribution of the fabrics across the blocks. And 3, I can see if I have too many in one area or not enough in another. And I can visualize as they go from smaller to larger the relative amount of each of the colors and fabrics I'll have in the quilt. Of course, I'll probably change it up some, that's no problem. But I wanted a reference point, because remembering from block to block can get a little stressful when you have 5 different blocks to make over 6 weeks. Or you can just wing it like I did with my Marvel Comics quilt, the first one that I made for this pattern. I just chose the fabrics as I went along, basing it off of what fabrics I had already used in a previous blocks, and made sure to use different fabrics. You do whatever works best for you. We're starting off our quilt along with the Friendship Star. This is what your block will look like when you're done. I chose to start with this one because it's a simple 9 patch. That means it has 9 squares. Here are the fabrics I've chosen for the Friendship Star block. On the left is the dark navy stars, which is the background for the quilt. The small red berry print is the accent outer corners for the block. The red plaid will frame the star, and then the cute snowman pattern will be the print for the star itself. A couple of tips when making this block. You'll want to consider starching your fabrics for this block. Whether you use sizing or starch or best press, whatever works for you, I suggest that you consider using that. Because these pieces are relatively small, the extra stiffness in the fabrics will help you be successful in constructing the block. I don't feel it's necessary for the larger blocks, but for this one, especially if you're a beginner, that might be helpful for you. When you're looking at the block, your fabric A squares will be the outside corners, your fabric B squares are all the background squares, and then fabric C is your focal star legs and star centers. The next thing you'll want to do is mark the backs of your fabric B squares. This is in preparation for making your half square triangles. There are several ways to do this. I'm going to show you the no tool method. By that I mean you don't need diagonal seam tape or other fancy rulers to mark your squares. All you need is some kind of marking tool. A light one if it's dark fabric, such as for square B here, or you'll need a dark tool such as a friction pen. A pencil will work just fine, or a pen to mark the backs of your lighter squares. In the pattern I call for marking your B squares. That's because you'll need them for both your AB half square triangles and your BC half square triangles. So it's easiest just to mark your B squares. However, if you don't happen to have a light marking tool, if your background happens to be dark like mine, you could instead mark your A and your C squares, although it is double the work. I'm showing these as examples. You do not need to mark all 3 sets of squares. When you mark your half square triangles, you might want to keep in mind what your fabric looks like if it's directional of any sort. For example, in my snowman print, you can see I have a snowman here and a snowman here. So rather than sewing and cutting across this way, I would cut off both snow people. So instead, I'm going to go diagonally this way across. So I flip it over, I lay my ruler down, and I'm going to put my pencil, in this case it's a mechanical pencil, right at the corner down here, just a hair off of center of the point, because I need to account for the width of my pencil. Then I'm going to swing my ruler up to the point at the top like that, just shy of it, to account for the width of the pencil. Then I'm going to draw my line. In this case I'm drawing it darkly so that you can see. Normally I would just draw a very light pencil line, like that, and there you can see I've marked my half square triangle. Of course, you might choose to use diagonal seam tape or another way to mark your half square triangles, whatever works best for you. I tend to use diagonal seam tape unless the square is very large. Next, I'm going to pair up my AB sets and my BC sets and get ready to sew them. Now that I've got my half square triangle units separated into my AB set and my BC set, I'm ready to sew. The best way to do this is to chain piece all of them. Down one side of the diagonal line, one after another, and then cut the thread, turn the whole long line of half square triangles around, and sew down the other side of the diagonal line. Here you can see that I've chain pieced or sewn assembly line style my half square triangle units for the AB and the BC units. Now it's time to cut them apart and then press them and trim them to size. You can see that I've stitched my half square triangles with a dark blue thread. You can certainly use white. I just happen to have it in my machine, and many of my fabrics are medium or dark in color. So now I'm going to trim them into their half square triangles. You could either use a rotary cutter or you can just take a pair of scissors. It doesn't matter as long as it's reasonably even. There's your seam allowance, stitch line, and then the half square triangle. In this video, I'm going to show you the traditional way to trim half square triangles without any fancy tools. It will just be your ruler and your mat and your rotary cutter. You, of course, can use whatever method you'd like to trim your half square triangles. My personal preference is the Clearly Perfect slotted trimmers because I can do 2 things at once. I can trim them to size and cut my dog ears. It actually cuts my trimming time in half. Don't forget, if you are using the Clearly Perfect slotted trimmer, you want to trim them first before you press your half square triangles open. But in the traditional method and the block lock method, to press your half square triangles open first and then trim them. I do have a link to the Clearly Perfect slotted trimmer in the video description, but of course you could use your block lock ruler or a square ruler, or you can use the method I'm actually going to show you, which is just using your ruler, mat, and rotary cutter. To trim your half square triangles without any specialty rulers or tools, this is what you do. You lay out your pressed half square triangle, so you've opened it up and you pressed it, and you're going to center it from side to side between the lines. You'll want to consult the pattern for the exact size, but in this case it's 2 inches, so I'm going to trim a little off of each side, like this. Turn it around, line up the cut side right on the mat line like that. Position my ruler, cut the other side. Rotate the square again, lining up the two cut sides on my mat, making sure that I have about an even amount on each side of these two lines here, and trim again on both sides. One thing that will help things go faster if you choose the traditional method is to use a rotating mat. If you happen to have one, that will definitely speed up your time. And trim the last side. And there is our cute little half square triangle all ready to go. All you need to do is press and trim all the rest of them, and then we'll be actually ready to assemble the block. One thing I'd like for you to notice is that when you're pressing your half square triangles open, you want to press toward the dark side. That means the seam, when you open it up, you open it toward the dark side and you press, and that will keep your seam flat and it will not show through on the lighter side. So press all your seams to the dark side. To assemble the block, all you'll need is your 4 outside corners. That would be your AB units, your fussy cut center, and your 4 BC units, which are your star legs. So let's assemble the block. So let me show you my mistake. This is what happens when you're tired and you're not paying close attention to your pattern diagram. You assemble it wrong. It took me a few minutes to figure it out, but then I realized my mistake and started over. All right, so let's try this again the right way this time. So start with your fussy cut center. If you fussy cut, that's fine. If not, just put your center block down. Then you're going to add your 4 corner pieces, and in my case, here's what I had reversed. I had the plaid on the outside, but that's wrong for what I'm using. Here you can see I've sewn the rows together, and I've pressed the seams in the correct directions. I pressed the top row seams that way, middle row that way, and bottom row that way. Now it's time to sew the seams together. I'm going to pin. I don't normally pin, but I'm going to pin at these intersections here, and then when I attach this section to the bottom row, I'm going to pin here and here, making sure my seams fit together like hand and glove, what we call nesting. I'll come back with the finished block. A quick note about pressing the final block. In the pattern, I tell you to press your top seam right here toward the top of the block and the bottom seam toward the bottom of the block. You could also press open if you prefer. Okay, I gave the block a quick press. Let me show you the back side. Right here, top seam pressed up, bottom seam pressed down. A couple of things to note. One, you'll see that the plaids that I used are a little bit wobbly. Before I cut my fabric pieces, I did do my best to square up the plaid. The problem is that the plaid is printed a little bit lopsided, and through use in the fabric store apparently was stretched a little bit. So I did my best, and I'm not going to worry about it or stress about it. I think it looks good the way it is. The second block in this video will be the star flower. The star flower is put together similarly in that it is composed of half square triangles and single fabric blocks. For the fabrics for my star flower block, I chose to have the star portions be a red and blue print alternating with a white on white snowflake background against the dark blue background of the quilt itself. I think it's going to look great. One tip is to be sure that your 2 star fabrics have a strong contrast and the background contrasts well with both of those fabrics. That way your block will show up really well in the quilt. Here are the pieces you'll need for the star flower block. Fabric A over here, my white on white, is your outside corners. Fabric B will be all of the background that you'll need for all of the HSTs. Fabric C and D are my focal prints for my star flower block. For the star flower block, I won't be showing you how to make half square triangles or HSTs. I just showed you how to do that for the first block, the friendship star, so I'm not going to repeat it. I will, though, put the timestamp for the time where it starts in the video that shows how to do that. I'll put that in the video description, so you can just go ahead and go back to that if you want to review. It's no problem. So now I'm going to make my half square triangles. I'll sew them, cut them, press them, trim them, and then I'll show you how to assemble the block. I've made my half square triangle units. You'll have 3 sets of them for each. This is your AC unit. A is the background fabric. This is the AD unit. There are 4. And then I have the CD unit as well. Make sure you have pressed to the darker fabric when you're pressing your half square triangles. Now we're ready to assemble our block. To assemble this block, you'll want to refer to the pattern diagram. That will help you keep all the blocks straight. You start with the 4 outside corners, that's the easy part, then look carefully at the diagram. There's the first row. Now I have the first and the second row done. Now I have the first, second, and the third rows. Let's do the last row. Now I've added the 4th row. It's a little difficult to get it all on camera. I will take a photo of the block, and now I have all 4 rows assembled. It's time to sew them together. You can sew them in rows going across this way, of course, or you could sew them in columns in double patches like this, and then sew these as double patches and then join them together. It's totally up to you whichever way you do it. When you go ahead and press them, remember to press row 1 to the left, the seams to the left, row 2, the seams go to the right, row 3, the seams go to the left, row 4, the seams go to the right. That way when you're putting all of the rows together, the rows will nest at the intersections in the block. I'll assemble the units and then show you the final block. Before I sew the middle seam and put the block all together, I wanted to point out something about the pressing. In my pattern directions, I'm going to have you press the seams, these seams here for the rows, toward the center of the block. This way. Let me show you what I mean. I flip it over. I've pressed this seam toward the center of the block. My thinking for this is twofold. One, then these seams will not show in the background of the block. And 2, these intersections will be less bulky, especially this particular one. I will, however, press the middle seam open because there'll be less bulk right here in the very center of the block. Here's the star flower block. I have not trimmed it yet. Let me show you the back side. Again, you can see I've pressed the center seam open. That helps to reduce the bulk in the middle. The last thing you'll need to do with this block is to trim it to size. Consult your pattern to tell you the correct block size. There you have it, the star flower block. That's it for week number 2 of our Quilt Along, A Walk in the Stars. Thank you for watching. Again, please like, share, and subscribe. If you have any questions, just put them in the comments or go to my blog and email me that way as well. I'll see you next week when we do the Ohio Star block. Thank you for watching.